was born in a blaze, forged in the flame. Whispers of ash are calling my name. Dancing embers light my way. I am the night, I am the day. Hear the crackle, feel the spark, a burning heart in the deepest dark. Raise your hands, ignite the sky. We live, we burn, we never die. I am fire, I am storm, a raging heart forever warm. Let the world be turned to gold. In the heat my story's told. I am fire, I am free. The flame of fate burns wild in me. Smoke and shadow dance as one, under moon or under sun. Chains will break, the past will fall. From the ashes I will call. Hear the crackle, feel the spark, a burning heart in the deepest dark. Raise your hands, ignite the sky. We live, we burn, we never die. I am fire, I am storm, a raging heart forever warm. Let the world be turned to gold. In the heat my story's told. I am fire, I am free. The flame of fate burns wild in me. Let it rise from the ground to the endless skies. Let it rise, we are the light that never dies. I am fire, I am storm, a raging heart forever warm. Let the world be turned to gold. In the heat my story's told. I am fire, I am free. The flame of fate burns wild in me. Got a sky in my chest and thunder veins. I walk where the wind forgets your name. Boots full of mud, but I don't slow down. Storm in my blood, I own this ground. Rivers rage, but I don't drown. Lightning follows where I'm bound. My soul's been carved from twisted bark. I howl at dusk, I shine in dark. I'm a storm heart born to break, roaring wild in heaven's wake. Torn and tattered, still I ride with the thunder by my side. Storm heart never tame, whispers rain and curses flame. Won't hold. I burn through lies they try to mold. Cold steel lies and a voice like hail. I raise my song on a cyclone's trail. I'm a storm heart born to break, roaring wild in heaven's wake. Torn and tattered, still I ride with the thunder by my side. Storm heart never tame, whispers rain and curses. Let the cold wind tear my skin. I was made to ride through sin dust on my coat, steel in my glance. I ain't here for a second chance. Whoa, whoa. I'm a storm hard to hold, while the thunder carved in gold, tumbling, breathing, bold and dry. I don't beg, I burn the sky. They laid me down in a bed of coal, dust in my mouth, no light, no soul. But roots don't die in a world gone cold. I drank the dark and I grew bold. The wind it wept, the ground it groaned. My name was lost, my skin was bone. But in that grave I found my form, not dead, just ash reborn. I rise like smoke, I ride the flame, no longer bound, no longer tamed. From broken stone and splintered thorn, I am the fire, ash reborn. They spoke in fear, said I was cursed, but I was forged in something worse. Their crosses burned, their prayers fell short. I walked through hell and needed naught. Now I wear flame like a Sunday dress, scarred but smiling, nothing less. The past can haunt, but it can't want a soul like mine, ash reborn. I rise like smoke, I ride the flame, no longer bound, no longer tamed. From broken stone and splintered thorn, I am the fire, ash reborn. Oh, oh, oh. Let the crows sing my name, let the rains wash their blame. They'll find my story in the storm, scrawled in soot, ash reborn. I rise like smoke, I ride the flame. No chains to break, no one to blame. This world is scorched, but still I mourn. Then lift my head, ash reborn. I've seen the fire, I felt the rain, but I kept moving through the pain. They said it's over, said I'm done, but I was made to face the sun. Oh, oh no, oh, oh, oh no. I've prayed in silence, worked through doubt, built my road and walked it out. No crowd behind, just faith ahead, and words I never left unsaid. We never die, we don't back down. We hold our ground in hallowed ground. With every mile, with every cry, we rise again. We never die. Oh no, oh, oh, oh no, oh, oh, oh no, I've seen good folks lose their way, but I still choose to bow and pray. 'Cause strength ain't loud and hope don't shout. It lives in hearts that don't burn out. We never die, we don't back down. We hold our ground and we're built to burn. We never die. We never die, we don't break fast. We carry light that's built to last. Through dust and years and endless sky, we ride with grace. We never die. I saw the fire consume the land. I felt the ashes in my hand. The ones I loved were torn away. Their voices haunt me night and day. I took an oath I can't let go. It burns inside, is all I know. Through blood and stone, my path is clear. Their end will come, the time is near. The streets were filled with smoke and cries. The stars looked down with hollow eyes. No prayer was heard, no mercy stayed the night. Remember what they mean. I swore on ash, I swore on bone to break their crowns, to shake their throne. No God above could turn my hand. My oath was carved into the land. I took an oath I can't let go. It burns inside, it's all I know. Through blood and stone, my path is clear. Their end will come, the time.
Oh, good evening, YouTube. Good evening, reptile community. How are we all? We're back for a third session this evening, and we've got a special one. As you can see, no, that's not right. Why have I got? I've not got Jordan in the right place. Oh, bear
You
with
broke
me.
it. You've
I've
broken
broke
it already.
I've broken it already. Give me a second. Let's. Oh, I've tested all this all day today, making sure I've got it perfectly fine, and
And then it's not
clearly-
perfectly fine.
It's not. Where is Jordan? Where is he?
Oh.
Here's somewhere.
He's in his room. Oh, wait. Hey. Oh.
That's an interesting one, is it? Wow. Always, a bit of technical errors. So if we do this, we grab this. Okay. Oh, there's a Jordan, everyone. A wild Jordan sat there. Grab that down.
You're just going to crop it now.
Right, we'll slide him in there. There we go. Look, no technical issues here, people. Professionals. Standard. We're learning. We're evolving. So, I don't want to crop Jordan too much because he's made an effort with these. I'm going to leave him there.
I crop it a little bit to the right because you're going to be taking over the speech otherwise from the tech. There we go. That's the one.
There we go. Look, because I want to leave the beautiful enclosures that Jordan's got with us there because he's brought them up tonight for this, haven't you, Jordan?
Yeah, I've obviously got the big display ones behind me, but being late now, a lot of them have gone to sleep now. So
Taking themselves to bed.
I've brought in a couple of examples of some of the styles we go with when it comes to the biodiversity. And this one is actually, I've got a lovely little surprise in this one. So
Just take you all out of the pic and put Jordan on the big screen. At least we know where we're wanted, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How are we all? So, as you can see, we've got Jordan with us this evening. So, Jordan is the owner of JSL Chameleons and Exotics. Jordan's got 25 years in the industry, working with lots of different species, from large constrictors to venomous crocodilians, and in most recent years he's really honed in on chameleon species. Jordan's working to establish and re-establish lesser kept species here in the UK, and we've got some fantastic stuff to talk about this evening, including a UK second and a M.A.D Exotics exclusive. Isn't that right, Jordan?
Yeah, it worked out quite well today, actually.
It did, didn't it? So if we switch over to this second screen, Jordan's camera's probably... Oh, no, it's fine. This here...
Oh, you fixed it.
I have fixed it. So what species is this that I've got on the screen at the moment, Jordan?
This is, and it's a first for myself as well. This particular species hasn't really been captive bred much across the globe. Probably a bit in the States, but certainly not in Europe.
Yep.
And as I said, it's so we've hatched the first of the giant warty or giant spiny chameleon, which is Versiva vericosis, which I'm really chuffed about. Animals wild caught animals, they don't tend to do so well in captivity, which is again is another reason why it's very important that we get these animals established in captivity with captive populations. Obviously, the large male that you presented a picture of, he's one of my wild caught ones, and yeah, he's a wonderful boy. Not the easiest one to deal with, but as long as you've got a few bugs around and that, he can be easily convinced to
He
work.
looks a little bit grumpy there.
Yeah, but he's an absolute stunner, bless him.
The colours on him are amazing.
It's
He really
just a shift.
white spots, flecks around the pouches of the sides of the head, which lends its name to the giant warty. And when they really warm up, you get this most beautiful mint green on the top, with the base going into this beautiful like deep grass green with, as I said, flecks of white along the body as well. A very underappreciated one, and also part of my mission really is to give much more exposure to certain species like these, and the Malagasy giant they used to let. For a long time, the industry has been heavily focused on pardalis, the various locales of panthers, purely because of the vibrancy and colour.
Yeah.
Obviously, what I'm trying to do.
That's incredible. So that's a second time UK breeding, isn't it? And you're only picked to the post.
The first ones were actually bred by my good friend Lee Warren at Millennium Reptiles, and that was this year. And I do believe these this year is the first time that they've been bred here in the UK. I certainly haven't come across who has, but I'm happy to be corrected if this is the case. But as I said, with the extensive contacts I have, I've certainly not come across anybody that has told me that they've been able to in the past. So, and as I said, to be fair, we've very rarely seen even wild caught specimens over here in the UK. So more than likely, this is the case.
That's amazing.
They are fantastic. They are absolutely fantastic.
Congratulations on the breeding as well. It's really something special when you're working with a species like that, and you've brought the animals in from wild caught and established them. So well done. So now that we've let go of the because Jordan's been keeping it under his hat all day, and when I spoke to him earlier, he's like, normally it's out there. He says, I'm getting itchy fingers. So I said we'd make sure that was the first thing we spoke about. So what I want to touch on now, Jordan, is your sort of origin story. And I don't mean the usual what got you into reptiles. We've all been there and experienced it and heard it on a lot of other podcasts and a lot of other platforms on how people first got their first reptile. But what made you move from everything that you've worked with, because you've worked with some really exciting animals, to then come into the chameleons. What was that shift? What caused that?
So I've touched a bit on the early days. So back in the early 2000s, I came across who's now a good friend of mine, Mr. Mark Whitworth, who previously founded the Reptile Room in Blackpool. Unfortunately, no longer doing. And he was a fellow keeper, and back then, pre-Brexit, there was some wonderful stuff coming through from places like Tanzania and other South Central parts of Africa. And it was through Mark I started looking at chameleons a little bit differently compared to the usual. At the time, generally, it tended to be more like the Yemens, Asian or panthers, but apart from that, there was very, very so it just kind of opened the door for me, really. And at that point, I just became very fascinated. There was such a what I love about chameleons is the diversity of them. You know, they're such an anomaly. And it's not just one anomaly. You know, whether it's how the eyes work or the long tongue or the colour stuff. Just everything fascinated about me. I wanted to learn more and more about them, which kind of goes back to my background as a scientific and natural history illustrator. Always wanted to know how things worked and what have you. So it started off there, and for a little while, when the python craze kicked in, I took a little step back from the hobby purely because I didn't like how this money was coming into, and it was actually at the expense of the standards, dropping because it was purely about money. People weren't taking their time to understand and learn these animals. It was right straight into it, which is why I feel like now, using like the Royals as an example, we have so many issues with defective genes because everybody's jumped onto it without really fully understanding the science and biology. People think like, oh, if I stay away from, say, the spider gene as such. But the problem is when you've got multiple genetics into one animal, nobody knows exactly what genetics previously are in there. And this is where the waters get muddied, and we're now at a situation. So the naturalist in me moving forward now is when I came back into it, well, the naturalist in me was that fascination. Now, I've always had a concern as well with conservation. I've previously done charitable work in the conservational field when I graduated. Incidentally, I was actually offered a position with Steve Irwin at Australia Zoo when I graduated, but unfortunately, and now I'm obviously very gutted, I didn't take the position. However, that burning desire in me to kind of make a difference in conservation has just got more. But going to the chameleon side of things, the concerns of deforestation or like land shrinking like you have in the Seychelles as such, it greatly concerned me that what's going to happen to all these wonderful animals as their environment shrink. Where they're going to end up, what's going to happen to them. And obviously the great issue with Brexit is it's made more difficult, particularly when it comes to the wild trade. It made me realise how important it is, particularly here in the UK, where we have greater limitations than, say, in mainland Europe, in obtaining these species. So I spoke to various people, including Mark O'Shea, a friend of mine, who I know has obviously worked in the field. Curator of East Midlands Safari Park. And I said, look, this is what I'm looking at, is like to kind of start a breeding program where we can establish captive populations of as many different species, chameleon, in the UK. Just on the offset, that if it comes down to it, there's these healthy populations with multiple strong genetic bloodlines. And he said, you are going to, he was, I mean, and the beauty about it is he didn't sugarcoat anything. He told me straight. He said, you're going to probably struggle with it. Reasons being, it's highly unlikely they will ever introduce because, you know, there's a potential of introducing diseases into the wild and all these various things. So you're going to come across a lot of obstacles in terms of people taking you serious. So I took all this information in, and I, you know, I still made the decision. Right, I'm still going to move ahead and do what I can. I mean, it's very easy, as we all know, that to look at it as, well, I'm only one person. I don't necessarily have a wealth of financial support behind me. So what can I do? Like, well, the thing is, like everything, if everybody did their own little bit, you add all that together, suddenly you've got an army. So, but it starts with the one person. So obviously I started this various thing, and over the years I've accumulated contacts and acquaintances, not just here in the UK, but in Europe and America and Asia. And also like in some of the zoos and the organisations who I now supply and support. And, you know, discuss things further, how I could do this, do that. And then I also met other fellow enthusiast keepers and breeders. And through their own personal knowledge, but also their ethics, and they aligned with mine, I began to kind of work cohesively with several of those in terms of trying to start with just a few species and trying to kind of have as many diverse genetic lines as possible. So we work off our own unofficial stud books, so we know exactly what animal has gone with where and where it goes, so we can kind of keep on tabs. So we know like the likelihood of anything coming back is going to be, you know, extremely minimal. And it's just kind of, the rest of it is kind of grown organically, really. I've been very fortunate. I mean, yes, I do publicise parts of my work through social media, but a lot of it has come from word of mouth, which, you know, I'm extremely appreciative of. I purely come from an educational part. I'm not here for fame. I'm not here for the money. In fact, every penny that I make just gets churned back into it to improve things. I mean, in fact, I do actually do all my own custom designs and builds. I offer advice and support, and I'm always on hand 24/7 to people should they need it. But on the other hand which is a key point, I'm never afraid to say I don't know, or that's an interesting one, let me find out, you know. I think that's part of what the hobby misses. There's too many people who, through whether they're trying to kind of help or trying to be seen in a different light, they offer advice that can actually be damaging considerably. So part of the mission as well as obviously the breeding is trying to bring up these standards, not just kind of the minimum, but, you know, lead by example and try and do the best. Just because our standards say, for instance, that we keep our animals in this size and this is what we do, doesn't mean we're restricted to that. You know, what we need to be looking at is actually what's most beneficial for the animals. If we're going to improve our, you know, our standing, particularly with the issues we've got with the animal activist aspects, you know, we've got to be trying harder, you know, and, you know, not being afraid to say, actually, what I've done isn't always right. I hold my hands up. There's probably not one person, and that's including myself, that hasn't made mistakes, but that's how we learn. You never learn from getting it right every time. Everything's through trial and error. All the zoos are exactly the same. You know, they work through trialing various things and whether it works or whether they need certain things. So obviously, like going obviously to my enclosures here, this generally doesn't stay still. You know, I observe and I watch to see what the animals are doing, and sometimes we may have to completely rechange it because it just isn't happening. Going back to in terms of the breeding side, I get really into things like in terms of I follow seasonal cycles, all the various data. So I'm looking at temperatures, humidities, what kind of plants are in that particular area, all these various things that play a part, you know, different ways of obtaining moisture as well, you know. So I never stop still. I'm never really happy with the final thing. I mean, I'll take you to an example at the moment, the Brachysia, the pygmy leaf chameleons. But we work with there's only 5 legal species you can actually import. And we work with all 5 of those. And I've had a modicum of success, and thankfully I have also a couple of acquaintances who are doing quite well with them. And we pass over information to try and improve those things and see what works with one and the other. But I've completely, from this year, not having as much success as I want, I've completely gone back and I've changed their environments to see kind of, and actually already I'm seeing a difference in behaviours and stuff. So it's a bit like that old thing of this is how we did things 20 years ago. Just because that's how we've done things, we should still be looking to move forward, you know, and constantly challenge the norm. I've done it many times, and even with being questioned and ridiculed, I've proven things actually are the difference, despite what the books tell us, or like the experts of yesterday. But really, providing you do your due diligence, don't ever be afraid of speaking up and challenging the norm. You know, particularly like if you've seen something and it's worked that goes against the grain. You know.
Oh, that's all fair points. There's stuff that people don't want to work with. People don't want to challenge a lot of the time because we keep the animals. We get especially with chameleons, you need to have it at this temperature, this humidity all year round, this light cycle. But the reality is light cycles vary throughout the year. March is going to be different to August. And what we have as a light cycle that we replicate in the UK, if you've got a wild caught animal, I'm guessing that can cause aggro as well.
Absolutely. That's not only acclimating to our seasons, but also slowly turning that around. Obviously, I can't create a summer season right now, and then obviously when the summer comes, create a winter one, which obviously is even more difficult to get those temperatures dropped unless you're pretty much in an artificial room, which even then is still a difficult thing. So, you know, you're looking at, you know, at times kind of, it can take like up to a year before you've fully acclimated them and turned around the season. But it's like things like looking more into, you know, there's still this thing like, you know, we give them a 12-hour light cycle. Well, the thing is, and that, you know, it's not straightforward. Like this time of year, you know, you're actually looking more like a 6 to 8 hour cycle. So it's looking how we utilize them. I mean, for instance, I don't use the luminized stuff because as much as it sounds great, it still doesn't replicate what we need. What I try and do though is how I use my heat sources as well as my light sources. So for instance, the UV doesn't necessarily need to be running all during those days. You know, you can have your cloudy periods and stuff like that. So actually, in terms of seeing their behaviour work correctly, you know, you've got to take this into consideration. So there's not actually any harm to, maybe kind of have a break of, the UV for a couple of hours during the afternoon or something, And as I said, basically, I try and base on what outsiders doing. So, at the moment when it's hitting about 4 o'clock is when I start dulling things down up to the point where all they've got really is their heat source, which then goes off at 7 o'clock. So it's all these various things, but it is trial and error. I can only go much by the data as I can, but the rest of it is in what your animals are doing. I do have this mantra, which is research through observation. Everything is learnt by what your animals teach you, and you've constantly got to be watching what they're doing. They're the best teachers out there. They'll tell you if something's right or not right, and such. Chameleons can be a little bit more difficult because they're very good at disguising things. It's a bit like the issues with if they're ill, they're very good at hiding it. So you don't get a lot of time. So again, that's where it's very important you understand your animals, what they're doing, because once you start seeing a negative behaviour, you've got to start asking the questions why, and trying to remedy it. We still, in some respects, we still have this lazy attitude that cold-blooded animals need heat. It's completely inaccurate. I mean, like with a lot of the Chameleon species, barring like ones like those in the Middle East or certain aspects of Madagascar and such, the rest of them aren't particularly big heat baskets. You'll find a lot of them spend a lot of time more like in that mid-level, particularly those in mainland Africa. It's so easy to kill the animals, and people have this misconception as well. Like when they say the ambient temperature is this, they seem to think that that's ideal, but that's maximum what they'll tolerate. So, for instance, let's say we have a montane species that average ideal temperature for them is between 22 and 26 degrees. Obviously, the closer you get to that 26 degrees, if you have a temperature spike, your animal's in trouble. Whereas if your average is, say, 24 degrees, and you have that little spike, you can afford to, and the animal will tolerate that. So, whereas more people tend to look at the maximum thing and not necessarily have those various gradients in there. So it's learning as well, kind of, that what people say is not necessarily literal. You've got to look a bit more into it. And as you said, you pick chameleons, you've got to look at chameleons from an individual species basis. They're not all the same. They don't, they don't live the same. They don't live in the same environments. Their behaviours are completely different. So it's so easy to get things wrong. And you now start to understand why chameleons are well known for being quite a finicky species, because there's so much more to their behaviours and the success of keeping them healthy and thriving, that you have to treat them as such. That's what you're trying to do. Is in the long run, obviously, I want to be able to produce more educational information that people can go to and such. At the moment, I've currently not got a website, but that's something I'm working on, and it's purely from an educational point. Obviously, we have the forums and we have the Facebook pages, which is great. But to be fair, again, a lot of them are run by hobbyists. Some of them, we're very fortunate, are extremely knowledgeable. But again, a bit like people who open shops, you don't necessarily have to prove that you have a vast knowledge. And sometimes actually those with good intentions can kind of be the worst ones, because they're trying to do the right things, but actually they can do more damage, you see. So it's trying to, as I said, trying to kind of improve those levels across where people have the confidence that if they need to go to somebody that, you know, they're going to get the right information, you know. I'm not saying it has to necessarily be exactly the same across the board, but, you know, there should be at least some kind of consistency. You know, all these various things go towards improving the standards of reptile keeping here in the UK. And I sincerely believe as well, this would alleviate a lot of the issues we have with the negative campaigns against our hobby, you know.
Yeah,
Just quickly before we move on too far, I was going to ask, you're saying about like with the chameleons in different areas and all that, Madagascar and South, and the Africans and stuff. With the Madagascans and obviously the panthers, we all know of a lot of different localities there. How much does it vary across the localities? Because if you're looking to keep a panther and you get one type,
At least 50 various localities. Now, the issue we have with a lot of what is out there, you know, for sale, it's very difficult to know how pure what people are selling are pure. Some people may have bought thinking they bought a pure locale from somebody who hasn't necessarily been honest or doesn't have enough knowledge about the different locales. We found in the early days quite a few people couldn't distinguish the difference between one locale to another. So it's like kind of guesswork. And then the problem occurs where suddenly you've got your locales have they've muddied, and now you can't be sure. I get a lot of calls about people asking me about this was sold to me as if, what is it? And it can be very confusing, particularly when they're younger, because they completely show off. So the youngsters, as those colours start, the chromatophores start maturing and coming through. On a pure one, it's quite obvious. But when they've been muddied, say like there's like a cross locale, like an ambanja to an amberlobe, that can be completely different, and that can throw things out. And this is also a reason why I'm not completely against like morph breeding. You know, I can appreciate animals, but the naturalist in me wants to keep things in natural order, purely because of if it ever comes down to it, we need to repopulate. It's important we understand and we know what's there. And this is the issue. I mean, it's at the stage now is unless stuff's come in directly from the wild, that's almost the only way we can guarantee that we've got pure locales. And to be fair, anybody asks about panthers, I do a lot of time. I do send a lot of them to Lee because, you know, with the time I've worked with Lee and stuff, he obviously brings in stuff for fresh bloodlines and that. But like I said, he knows exactly what's gone with what. You know, he has a full thing. So 100%, you know exactly what you have.
Also with the locales, just quickly, how much does it vary in their care across the locales as well?
So this is another thing. Despite the fact of genetically, you know, they're pretty much the same animals, you know, they're spread over the full island, not just the island, but all the individual islands off the mainland of Madagascar. You know, and it's a bit like New Zealand. There's such a variance in environments and the weather. Obviously, it can have I mean, you've got certain species where even at night time, they're used to quite a mild temperature, whereas you've got other ones where there'll be quite a drastic drop. And that can play a big part in how well they do. You know, certain ones, you know, don't tolerate very well if they don't get that significant drop at night time. It affects the metabolism, it affects the life cycle, just purely everything, the breeding. So it's very important, you know, that we if we are talking about a particular locale, that we understand what their environment comes from. I mean, if you go and look at Madagascar and that, there are so many different habitats, you know, from dry, arid, thicket to the lush rainforests, to grassland savannas. You know, it's crazy, really, for considerably what is not a big island, but yet kind of like it gives us so many different things. So you have to almost treat every species, every locale as its own one in its own right. You know, I mean, you can probably get away with almost like a neutral way of keeping them, but there's a big difference between keeping something alive and something thriving. Do you know what I mean?
No, exactly. And that's what I just wanted to query. Obviously, you'd know better than anyone on this, but you go and look up a panther chameleon, for example, you're looking up a panther chameleon. No one particularly goes and looks up the locale that they've got because they don't think of it like that. It's like when you look up snakes, corn snakes, and things like that, colubrids, you're just looking at where that colubrid is pulled from when they have such a vast range that they cover.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, admittedly, like when panthers really started kind of hitting the scene over here in the UK, like I said, around 2005 is when they started getting really popular. Even, you know, and again, back then, really, we didn't understand about these various locales. You know, Madagascar is Madagascar. I must admit, I really struggled to get to grips with what is the difference between them, and particularly as well where we start getting this crossbreeding to try and get, you know, these cross bars, you know, the yellow belly, red bars or whatever. That really confused things because that it was more difficult to try and recognise what, you know, what that particular locale looked like. You see a pure one now, there's no distinguishing them. You know, it's such a. I mean, even if you've got something like a nosy bee and an banjo, which have like this turquoise colour to them, you know, to a novice and all that, you could quite easily think they're the same. But actually, when you know what you're looking at, there's big differences, and you can tell that from youngsters as well. But you've got to take the time, fully study and understand that animal, and as I said, looking at the greater picture rather than just treating it as a generic animal, you see.
I think that's a problem that you find with everything is that it's the quick turnaround, quick, this is what I've got. When reality is, like with everything, there is so much more depth to it. And if you don't take the time to learn your craft, you won't ever thrive in your craft, so to speak.
I mean, to be fair, though, I think these are really exciting times. I mean, you're finding those who are really passionate in the community. They're not just restrict research online. You know, a lot of them are now going out there to the wilds to experience it themselves. You know, it's all well and good, like for instance, the data stuff, but to actually physically go out there, when you get like when you're reading a report of like the data, you might just be getting like an ambient temperature, but you're not getting like the temperature of the soil. So, you know, it's learning things. So, for instance, going back to the pygmies, you know, I think a key to success with them is actually the soil temperature. You know, generally you tend to find a lot of them, they will tend to deposit in like the leaves of certain plants like Dracaena or under leaf thing. But also, we don't know enough about whether they actually, you know, lay nests and stuff. But so we're looking more into, as I said, the you know, the various temperatures. I mean, I actually want to hopefully get out there at some stage so I can actually start taking like pinpoint readings on, like I said, not just the soil temperature, but actually taking pH levels and things like that, so we know exactly what the soil content is made of. You know, because that can make a difference as well.
The alkaline and acidic levels and all that sort of stuff.
You know, so when you talk about the pH levels and stuff like that, normally you'd be looking at, okay, like that's purely more down to what you can grow and stuff, because it depends what plant goes in what. But it also has a knock-on effect, as I said, in when it comes to nesting and things like that, you know, how it holds together. But because that can play a part in terms of how much moisture stays in that ground, but also kind of the consistency of the temperature. Talking about animals that, you may have to be as specific as like 1 or 2 degrees between it, what I mean? Anything different, and, it's going to completely throw out the entire clutch. So
Just had a few. We've just had a few questions come in at the start, so before we move on, I just want to get these answered so they don't get lost. Longfield Exotics has said he's interested in how you run your stud book. He's heard that people go down the dog world route and then offer others who do stud books similar to how zoos work, where adults get moved around, babies get paired together and passed around, etc. So how do you run your stud books?
Still learning about these things because there's not a great deal of information out there. I'm very fortunate in that I do have contacts in within the zoological institutions, but again, anybody who's dealt with them, it's very much a closed book system where information's not really, or it's frowned upon to be able to share information. So trying to get any access to like their stud books is, unless you work within the institution, is very difficult. So it's a case of taking what you know. So obviously, like from say, as you said, like dog stud books and so forth. So we've just kind of created our own system that allows us to work from there. In terms, I mean, what you have to take into account is a lot of the species I'm working with, there's very few people in the country, so it's easy enough for me to be able to control, the genetics and follow it, because I pretty much know where the majority of these animals are and where they're going, you see. Obviously, when it comes to things like the Jacksons, that obviously coming in numbers from various importers and stuff, then that gets a little bit more difficult because you're reliant on people coming forward and being helpful in actually giving you information about what they have and where it's come from and stuff, which is not necessarily easy. So it's only as good as kind of what we, the information we have towards ourselves. So if I'm being honest, like I said, the stud books aren't they're not named as an official document. It's just something that we've chosen to work with to help ourselves, rather than trying to kind of constantly remember what's gone with there. It's easier to have a documentation of it. So as I said, it's kind of like a spreadsheet system that basically enables us. We what it is, the species, the name of that particular individual, number or what have you, where it's based, who it's paired to, the offspring, where the offspring go to, and so forth. So it's still a work in progress, but I certainly believe it's having a positive effect currently. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, as I said, I do supply and work with certain zoos. I've managed to already find a lot of interest in the Oosterlet's breeding program. We have several zoos who not just have my animals, there's also some from Peter Fulsham as well, which is great. So it means that we've got a multitude. I've also brought in fresh genetic finds from Europe as well, because that was a difficult thing with the Oosterlets. There was very limited numbers that came in that that survived the importing process, which kind of very much limited what we could do with it. So as I said, despite obviously the amount of success I've had with the species, and that, it's always been very important that I've always looked for that additional line and try to keep them as diverse as I can. And it's not just that, but you've got to think about the future, and that you're not going to have that animal forever. And when it comes to obviously any wild caught imports, we have no knowledge of their age. You might only have it for 6 months, who knows? So it's important kind of that we have as much diversity. So we're not master of a sunken ship before we've even begun, really. So
Fantastic. Liam's from Snake Station. He's asked, when we talk about the difference in locales and the different in care and stuff, especially when it comes to the panthers, like, and you get these minimum care sheets. So he's asking about humidity during the day. So it's like overall, it's like no humidity during the day. But is that still what's thought as a good standard of keeping now, where it's humidity overnight and that's it?
So basically, where we're kind of at with things at the moment is very much, you have this average. So, for instance, during the day, they'll say, like, take for example, for panthers, they'll say like between 50 and 70% humidity during, and then at night time you're looking at anything up to 100%. So it's kind of like a roundabout way rather than committing to a specific. This is why it's very important that we use a lot of these weather station sites that can give us more precise information. You're probably never going to exactly be able to get that consistency of, for instance, humidity throughout a day as you'd like. It's, you've got so many factors, like, you've got your external environment. For instance, like down here in Norfolk, like, our humidity levels are quite good, yet you've got other areas where it's quite low, and you're going to struggle to get that up without, unless kind of you go down the bioactive route, and you manage it very well. So you've got all these various factors, but as long as you can kind of get it within a parameter, this is the reason I think why they give you an average, is to understand that you're never going to be literally guessing it exactly like that. You'll really, really, and you'll be lucky if you were able to replicate that wild factor in there. So a friend of mine, Rob Pilley, who's a very successful breeder of Anellis, and he's done a lot of work out in the field. And I've spoken to him in the past, like, about Anellis, why so many people are with them. And he says the problem being is you'll never be able to replicate whatever's going up in the mountains there. There's something there that we just can't replicate in an artificial environment. Now, I don't know whether that's oxygen levels or saturation or whatever, it's going to be very difficult to kind of do that. So in some respects, we have to accept that some things we're going to have to kind of almost find a happy medium that works, not just for ourselves and where we're based, but also what works for the animal, keeps them thriving. Maybe one day we'll get there, I don't know, but certainly it's something I'd love to work, and I constantly question the norm, but at the moment it's very difficult to get that. But I certainly wouldn't go down the lines of going back to the original question of they're just this and that. There's much more to it, and if you're really interested in it, I implore you to, if you really want to learn about these animals, just go out there and find your knowledge. Check these official weather data sites, which will give you the various things like rainfall, your various temperatures and what really. And that's your best way to learn. So, but as I said, you're never going to get things perfect. You can only go to a certain level, but as long as you're happy that you feel you've done your due diligence to do the best for your animal, then that's all anybody can ask of you, really.
Fantastic. And then again, just before we move on, just one final question from myself is, currently, how many species are you working with?
So, currently, I've got about 21. I have others in the pipeline, but as anybody knows who's dealt with it, there's a lot of issues with exporting and importing. Funnily enough, I have been speaking to Tony Wrigley at RRK in regards to this, and he does have a meeting with DEFRA in regards to this, and I do have the opportunity to attend with him to get more information in regards to it, because there's a lot of confusion, particularly between what is personal animals, what is CITES, what is non-CITES, and what documentation you need. People had various different experiences bringing stuff in, including myself. I've had issues where based on the information I've been given, I've had certain documentation only to find out actually I should have had other documentation, but it's very difficult to get a response from APHA in regards to.
It's horrendous at times, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So we just want more clarity. No, I sincerely believe nobody wants to illegally import animals that will do things wrong. At the end of the day, it doesn't benefit anybody. At the end of the day, like if you're doing that and you want things on and that, questions are going to be asked, and you need to have a paper trail. So as I said, going back to it, there's a lot more species that are in the, they're in the plans, but again, a lot of it all depends on where I get with the export and paperwork. It's taken me a long time to build up trust and friendships with people, not just in Europe, but across the world, including like Korea and America, where they will actually quite happily do the paperwork, and I kind of get it from their points. It's like, they have the demand like in their own country, so why go through all the effort when they can make the same kind of money without having to go through all that? Because it is very time consuming, it's very frustrating. But this is where, as I said, it's important to build up those, those connections. But as I said, so I'm currently with about 21 species. And I am looking maybe to add another 4 or 5 different species next year. Currently, in fact, I've been having a conversation with one of my good friends over in Belgium in regards to plans and stuff. So that will be being put in place soon. As you know yourself, like we've spoken, I do actually keep several species that have not only never been kept here in the UK. I am the only ones to have kept them, and I've got some really exciting plans for those. But again, it all depends. I've had some ups and downs with those, but fingers crossed, really.
Fantastic.
I will just say, there's one question you've not covered, Mac. It was Ryan asked about helmeted chameleons.
I've literally got it written down. Well done. Thank you. Yeah, so Ryan says, what do you think of the helmeted chameleons? He's previously worked with them before, and he really likes them.
Absolutely wonderful little animal. However, and this is why it's very important, they're a prime example why it's important to get these established in captivity with multiple generations, because they are a prime example of a very finicky animal. When you get it right, they do extremely well. All you've got to do is speak to Rob Pilley. He keeps his for most of the year round outside in a greenhouse, like in quite large groups, and they do really well. They're one of the few species that actually, with adhering to certain rules, do very well in communally. But as I said, they're one of those ones where you've got to be very careful with the temperature thing. These are animals that live right up in the echelons of the mountains in Kenya and such. They will survive like in snowfall. When we're looking at 0 to the early minus degrees. Absolutely fine. But yet you put them anything like the upper 20s and beyond, you'd be very, very lucky if they survive. As a lot of us know, unfortunately, so many have come in that haven't done so well. And it's and I'll be absolutely honest, I've had my fair share of failures. At times, I've even considered maybe like helmeted aren't for me. However, I'm finally seem to be turning things around, doing really well, even currently at the moment. So, during the best part of the year, they're kept outside all year round. This time of year, when it's getting a bit harsher, they still don't go indoors. They're almost like in a between house. So I've got like an outdoor shed type environment where it still keeps the temperatures down. They do have access to a slightly increased temperature with only like a 25-watt bulb, just kind of keep it up a little bit if it does really drastically drop, but not enough to have an impact on them overheating or anything. And yeah, doing really extremely well. They're breeding, even the young babies and stuff like that, where it's quite vulnerable themselves. They seem to be doing really well. So fingers crossed. I've got to a stage where we're going to have success for years. Not just the helmeted, it's other species like Trossus jacksoni merrimontanus. They're another various one who prefer it much cooler as well, and they don't have that. They can't appreciate that fluctuation as much as say something like the yellow crested Jacksons. Like I said, this particular environment we've now set up seems to be kind of working quite well. Obviously, only time will tell, but we've had babies of the Merus this year as well, which and they're doing extremely well. In the first 6 weeks, they've practically doubled in size, so I'm really happy with that. Obviously, I will go for a little bit until I get over to like the 4-month mark, because we all know what it's like. You can be doing really well, and then you hit the 4 months or 3 months, and you can just lose them over nothing. So, for
the Morrows, was that a UK first as well? Or was that a first for yourself?
No, so the Merus have, going back to 20 odd years ago, there were captive populations over here, but a bit like with the Royal Python and the Panthers, that diversity, we're seeing it obviously across the spectrum with all reptiles, that diversity very so much shrunk because people chase the money, unfortunately. Now we've got the situation where animals that were deemed almost worthless are becoming passion projects for people, and that really excites me. Looking at the main interest in Anodus species, including Carolinensis. I love that. Before you could buy them for a few quid, and they were literally they were picked up as like snake food or whatever, because they were so common and stuff, and people had no interest. But now, kind of, there's just been this new passion and interest for it, and I love that. It's things like the Berber skink as well. All these various things that you really struggled to get anyone to buy them if you saw them in the shop. They'd be there for months. And this is again going back to like a big mission part of mine as well. Don't ever want that to happen to a stage where they will shrink again, and like, what happened to all these, and people not having that opportunity to maybe keep something that really passionate about, and it's not just for us, it's for generations to come as well. Those who have not had an opportunity to have any influence on how wildlife is seen and stuff. We often talk about this. Nobody knows in 20, 30 years' time whether half these species will still exist in the wild.
That's a scary thought, that itself.
Exactly. So, and that's the thing, is we're all, doesn't matter how big or how small we are, how much financial backing we have behind ourselves, but we're one person. It all starts with one person. We all have the opportunity to make a difference in this hobby, but we've got to be brave to stand up and say, right, we don't necessarily have to follow everybody in that. for fear of persecution or whatever. If there's something, you know, you're not comfortable with, you know, stand up and say, don't be afraid to be ousted for it. You don't have to be an animal activist to question ethics, you know. At the end of the day, we're all animal lovers, and that's the difference between us and activists. We genuinely do love animals. We're not here to create anarchy. We're here to create a better world, not just for animals, but for human beings as well, you know?
No, that's very fair. At the end of the day, if we don't put the effort in to preserve these animals, in 100 years, like you said, they might not be there for them. I mean, our kids now, and then our future grandkids and great grandkids even, might not ever have the experience of seeing some of the stuff we personally kept at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all you have to look, if you go back and you check the information from 1 year on end, how many species are going extinct in the wild, and it's just it's crazy, it's ludicrous. And without so many dedicated people, not just in the private sector, but also, as I said, in zoos and private institutions, without them kind of, I hate to think we're half of these. I mean, for example, look at a lot of various frog species, amphibious species that are literally on the brink of extinction, not through human interference, but also like through disease as such. But yet we've got people like Adam Bland at Chester Zoo who has dedicated his life to working with amphibious species, and you know he's done amazing things. Some of the species that that, as I said, are on the brink, that are doing extremely well in captivity, and you've even seen certain species that have been reintroduced, which is great. I mean, one, for example, is they're looking to reintroduce the European tree frog back to the UK, which I think is fantastic. You know, nobody ever thought they'd see stuff like that, but just through pure dedication of one or two people, and it can make the difference between, you know, that child caring about what goes on in the future with animals, or whether, you know, they let it pass by and disappear, you know. So
No, completely. I mean, it's even like people don't touch on it enough, any of it. But there's a species of cockroach as well that is only kept in captivity now, that is completely extinct in the wild, and its common name is the extinct cockroach.
but the interesting thing is, as well, like it's not just the you know, about keeping that particular. It's the symbiotic relationship within the world around it. You know, each animal, each organism plays a vital part in the survival of multiple other species, including ourselves. You know, I mean, what do they say? They said, if all invertebrates died within 7 days, the world would die. You know, that's quite a scary thought, really, considering how many people have a less than right view of invertebrates. You know, it's crazy, really, and it just goes to show how important it is that we give you know, these creatures just as much time as, you know, like the big warm-blooded animals. You know,
It's phobias at the end of the day that cause the biggest problem, and if you lose one member of the food chain, the whole thing collapses.
the funny thing about phobias as well, like I'd probably say 95% of phobias are unwarranted. They've probably never come across or had any physical contact with that particular thing that has created the phobia. You know, it's irrational. You know, and that's kind of sad, really. I mean, in terms of like going back to, as we know, like snakes, spiders, and such and things, a lot of that gets passed on from generation to generation. Like, you know, for instance, you know, mother to child as such, or what have you. And that kind of, so that kid becomes fearful of that before they know it. You know, I mean, when they first come into the world now, they're full of curiosity. They don't understand what fear. You can see that they'll go and pick anything up and everything. But the minute they understand what fear is and they're pointed towards it, you know, it completely changes their view, and it's really sad. I've always said that, like with my kids, I don't care in the future if they grow up and they're not interested in what I am, as long as they don't have a fear and they can appreciate it, you know, then my work's done, you know.
It's learned behaviour at the end of the day. Everything with a fear is learned behaviour. Apart from heights, I cannot stand heights, and I have not learned that from anyone. I just went there and decided it was the worst thing in the world.
Isn't the heights, the fear is the landing.
But the falling bit, I've got no problem with. It's the impact when you get there. That's going to hurt.
Really, the fear is the impact and the pain that comes with it, not necessarily the height. Do you know what I mean?
No, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I'm afraid of flying as well. Flying and heights, they go hand in hand. A boat breaks down, you can swim. A car breaks down, you can walk. A plane breaks down, that's game over. And to me, they're rational, but to some people, they're irrational fears.
That's the thing. But the thing is, it's like anything, like any feelings. Just because it might seem irrational to you doesn't mean it's to them. And you know, you've got to appreciate that. And you can't force people into changing it. You know, their feelings, because they're not a thought, they are a feeling, you know, and that can only come from gentle persuasion and
education.
You know, you can't force people into it. So and like I said again, a lot of that comes from education, you know, over time. And that if you expose people enough to that fear, and you prove actually that it's unfounded, and that, you know, there's a good opportunity you can completely change that. We see that a lot within the hobby. The amount of, like say, the amount of wives and girlfriends who are petrified of snakes and that, only to find themselves, you know, next time wanting to buy a snake because they've realised actually they're really interesting and they're not as bad as people think.
That was my wife.
A lot of people have the fear that snakes are going to be slimy. Where that idea comes from is beyond me, but a lot of people seem to think that.
Yeah, exactly. And they've had no kind of the amount of them, like, are so, you know, you can see it in they're so surprised when they actually touch one that it's nothing like they think. You know, I suppose a lot of that it comes, you know, eels, you see, because the eels looking like snake, and we know obviously they're slimy. So I think a lot of it kind of comes from that. But again, that's misinformation being passed down from one generation to another, you see.
Find eels are best jellied.
With lacquer.
Yeah. Longfield Exotic says, any recommendations for tropical chameleon species that can handle warmer reptile rooms?
Sorry, who's that? Sorry?
Longfield Exotics.
A certain species that can deal with what, warmer climates, did you say?
Yeah, so obviously he's got a reptile room and it's on the warmer side. So which species would be best suited to keep within a warmer reptile collection?
So really, predominantly, apart from a few of the mainland African species, you've got a lot of the Madagascan, but also the North African, South Middle East variety. So you're looking at things obviously like, you know, your panthers, but some that I'm trying to introduce at the moment and prove like how wonderful they are. Things like first Stelletti, the Malagasy giant chameleon. To me, I think they're a wonderful alternative to the panthers because although they're known as being a large one, they're quite long, but they're not necessarily. I mean, a male isn't. It's not excessively much bigger than like a male panther. Certainly not kind of on the levels of a Parsons. But to me personally, a much more laid back attitude. Panthers are very hit and miss, you know. You do get certain ones with dead chill, but on the other end, you can have ones that can be quite snappy. Because to be honest, in all the Stelletis I've worked with, male and female, they're so laid back and relaxed, you know, have no issues, and you actually find, without kind of going to the constraints of human emotions, you will actually find that they're very self-aware and they, will develop some kind of symbiotic relationship with you, and they become quite easy to deal with. They're quite happily, climb on you and allow you to handle them properly, and which is very useful when it comes to having to deal with them in health situations. And then you've got other species, again, like the Vericosis. The funny thing about something like Vericosis, though, is actually they don't do very well with a cooler climate. So they're one of those ones I was talking about, that even in nightfall, kind of, it tends to be a bit milder. So something like that you do very well. And in fact, the Vericosis probably is more similar on the size of a panther, if you wanted something a little bit different. And then you've also got, as I said, you've got your Yemens. Obviously, as we know with Yemens, though, generally tend to have a bit of disposition, which is quite interesting, actually, and something I hope to have success with next year. I've brought in the Chameleon calcarifer, which is the Saudi spurred chameleon. They're kind of like a subspecies of the Yemen. For many years, they were found like in the southern parts, like Saudi Arabia, and they were just considered like, a locale of the Yemens, slightly smaller with a smaller casque, but they've now they've been referred to as their own one, but there's a bit of a grey area, so they still consider them as like a bit of a subspecies. However, as I said, like the males probably get to about the size of a female Yemen, but their attitude is brilliant. They're, again, very much like the Usadlets. They're quite happy to be handled, and they will actually interact with you as well. As I said, I'm working with 2 different genetic lines at the moment, so fingers crossed I'll have those available next year. For anybody who's interested in those, you can actually see images of those on my pages.
Which species is that? Sorry, Jordan.
Again, sorry?
Which species was that? Sorry.
It's the Saudi spurred chameleon, which is Chameleon calcarifer. Used to be known as Chameleon calyptratus calcarifer, but I do believe that's now.
There we go.
What you'll find with them is, rather than where you've got those quite dark patches on a Yemen, there's more like a really nice subtle grey, but with black spots. And the yellow tends to be a little bit paler with the green. So yeah, that's one of the males. And as you can see, like his casque is more like the size of a female Yemen. And it's quite interesting as well. As the youngsters, they show a lot more. They show a lot of grey as the chromatophores are improving. Like they tend to go green to grey as they look. I mean, but as you can see, like there's lots of real pale greys, whereas like in a calyptratus and that you have a lot more contrast with like black and like a deep green, which it's almost like a more washed out look.
They are stunning. They are stunning, because you've got the best of both worlds with them as well, haven't you?
As like I said, kind of fantastic behaviour. This one here, Jafar. He was. I've had him out. He's actually been sat in my hand while feeding. He's completely. When he first came to me, he wouldn't really use his tongue, but over time, I've actually retrained him to fully use his tongue now. He's fantastically well. So, yeah.
There was another question about species of chameleons as well. Someone was asking if there's a more arid species.
Say again, sorry?
A more arid species of chameleons, sort of more desert spaced.
I mean, funnily enough, actually, like if you go into where you find them in Saudi Arabia, it's quite heavily planted areas. You'd consider it's going to be more desert-like, but no, they actually come from areas where it's still quite heavily forested. So and they're very much the same. They'll quite happily bask at 35 degrees, but midday they will they'll tend to shelter where it gets too hot. And that's the thing. And these are one of the species that generally are regarded as big, like sunbaskers, you see. So it just goes to show all animals kind of have their limitations, you see.
Okay.
And is there an arid species of chameleons readily available to the pet industry, or not even the pet industry, like keepers aspiring to move on to
Obviously, like again, here in the UK, we are limited because there's not many people who have, shown interest either in bringing them in or working with them. But and the thing is as well, like these ones, because they're not the cheapest as well because of the rarity. Like for instance, been watching things, a good friend of mine, Brett Hanson, who successfully bred the Namaquensis from, the little desert chameleon from the Namibian desert. That which one about like extreme temperatures there, and they do extremely well. But then other species which I've worked with in the past, but I'm trying to kind of procure more things like the flat-neck chameleon, which is Chameleon dilepis, and which kind of come from like the savanna lands of Africa, so where it's quite hot, big open lands, you see the grasslands, and they're quite used to that, like the hot temperatures. Again, that's another one that long term I want to get established, but at the moment, we are talking about limitations of what's available, really. So, but like I said, it goes back to it just shows the importance of what we're trying to achieve. You see.
We spoke about quite a lot tonight. Just in the conversations that we've had, we've covered a lot of the stuff that we had on the sort of the agenda, if you would. One of the things that we haven't touched on was that you have been considering the idea of a educational outlet, as in YouTube, and that's what spurred inviting you on, because there was a lot of people asking for this information, and you asked the question is, what would people like to see from UK content in terms of chameleon care and husbandry, etc. So that's something that we would like to get some feedback on from everyone as well. Is what would you like, if Jordan was to go ahead with this, what would you like to see, and what sort of species do you want covering? Do you want him to introduce you to what he's working with? Do you want him to do care sheets? These are the sort of questions that Jordan had as well, and you actually asked them in the RS UK chats, didn't you?
Yeah. If people want to person to me, I'll start. Obviously, like I said, I'm not round the corner to start this or anything like that. As I said, I'm heavily invested at the moment with the facility at the moment and stuff. But these are kind of things going forward. I mean, if I'd be absolute, years have kind of taken off. Like I'm probably like 3 or 4 years ahead of where I anticipate myself being, which it kind of makes me feel happy because it means that there is that interest in chameleons. Chameleons have always in this country been, I always felt I've always been not necessarily given the attention and the credence to, what they are really. I mean, when you look at kind of how people value them, you've got certain rare species and that people have to be convinced that they're worth the thing. But when you talk about time that's invested in them and things like this, but also like the whole point of the more things become readily available, the more frequent, like the better value they will be for people. In a way, I kind of like it that in terms of that cheap animal, because it's of all the reptile species, they're one of those that definitely need the right investment right from the offset in order for them to do well. And like your cats and your dogs and that, once you've invested at the beginning, pretty much that's your outlay. The rest of it is just like wear and tear, like your bulbs and stuff. You know, once you've got that, you're pretty much set for the duration of that animal's life, you know.
Yeah, fantastic.
Actually, just quickly touching on that before we go to any further again. With setting them up, obviously, the question that I've always wondered, is it better to start them on a smaller baby setup, or is it better to go straight in at the deep end?
So, again, there's really a one answer fits all with that species. I've always been a firm believer with this, is like, what would an animal do in the wild? So, you know, like it's things like people almost mollycoddle their animals, like, oh, I have to put my food in a little pot for them so they can find it. But they don't have that luxury in the wild, and you're actually kind of, as long as you kind of put the food within the vicinity, it's to me, like, you know, it's very important they learn right from the offset how to hunt their prey and what have you. So, you know, you can you can't you never really go wrong with giving a decent size. But then again, like if you've got something like a Parsons, I'm not going to put a hatchling Parson in a walking enclosure. Just purely
find it again.
There's no that. Whereas if you something, for instance, like some of the smaller montane species like Elliott's chameleons, you could quite happily put them in the size of a full-grown one, as long as it's well planted and stuff, and you know that they're able to utilise the full thing. I don't see any harm in that basically, and as I said, it'd be no different than being born out in the wild. You know, they're going to be restricted to like a little small area, like a little nursery. You know, they'll make their own decision if they want to stay within a vicinity of something, or whether they need to travel ahead. You know, again, kind of, it's kind of about being sensible about it, really, in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And it's also things like you're not going to put a young baby on the same temperature as you are an adult, purely because like their body can't cope with like the extremities that maybe an adult can. So, you know, this is why like a lot of the montane species, they have no heat on them for at least the first few months. There's no need to really. They'll get you know, like the ambient temperature, like in a room or through like the lighting, will be more than enough for them. You know. So you've got to look at the animal individually, really. Just touching on it again as well, like this is a great thing as well, like going back to there's all these myths about chameleons must be in a really well-planted cage, they can get away. But, you know, that can be as detrimental as it can be to have a sparse cage, you know, like the animal needs to feel like it can move around and stuff. You know, so it's about kind of really considering their environment. So, for instance, if you can see like the one next to me, this is basically a setup for a cristatus, a crested chameleon, and basically it's got different thickness branches. This kind of various thing you'd find like in the forests of Uganda and Cameroon. So you've got various foliage, what have you. And then you've basically got your different branches, but there's enough in there that should she want to kind of hide herself away, there are places. But again, there's also spaces where she can freely get about. And always, there's also been this misconception about when it comes to keeping chameleons, height is the most important thing. Well, the problem being is, if, for instance, you put a chameleon in, say, a 6 foot high cage, but only, say, 2 foot square, the bottom 2, maybe 3 foot is wasted. They'll only ever go down there if they're nesting or if something's not right. You're better off giving them more of a wider area. So, as you can see, like with these species, or you know, you've seen the ones at the back, they're not necessarily the highest, but they've got really good area around it. And actually, when you see how your chameleons use that, it's so much better suited for them. You can get multiple gradients throughout that in different places, you know, that they can go to. They utilise that so much more than they would in a height one, you know. So there's all these various things to consider, and that goes back to what I was saying about the importance of not being afraid to challenge, you know, the institute or what they've always said it was, you know. And that's the thing is a lot of these purpose-built cages you can buy, you know, are actually wrong, really. Which again is the reason why I custom design and build all my own enclosures. I design them specifically to the animal, you know, based on how I know their behaviour is and what kind of environment they need. You see, so you know, we're only restricted by our imagination. You know, we're very fortunate these days. When I first started out, I said 25, 30 years ago, we didn't have this equipment. We didn't have, you know, you couldn't really buy it. You certainly didn't have the mesh cages. So a lot of it was basically you made yourself, or you might have used certain products that were made maybe for something else, like aquatics or what have you. I mean, like the first thermostats pretty much were that kind of thing, you see. They weren't. So whereas now, you know, there's no excuse for giving them the best life they can. I mean, people are amazed by that. Every single animal I have, including all my hatchlings, are all straight into bioactive. You know, it's the best way. I think, as I said, I think we can mollycoddle our animals a bit too much, you know, in terms of, you know, the paper towel thing and stuff like that. But all of my cages, I have minimum maintenance to them. Cleanup crew does all of that, the cycle and that, and it's interesting to see how it all works, you know. And I can guarantee my animals are some of the healthiest animals you'll see, purely because there's that balance between, you know, good and bad bacteria. You see, you know, they've got good immune systems. We all should know this through like COVID, like, you know, our immune systems are wiped out, and now look at us, you know. So it's kind of, it's having, you know, being sensible about things, you see.
Well, it's like the first few months of life for anything is the most important for its immune system. Just quickly touching on the enclosure sizes, Jordan. So basically, I mean, the big thing everyone goes is a 2x2x4 for any chameleon. So you've got 2 wide, 2 deep, 4 high. But realistically, with what you're saying is that, say, a 6x2x2 could be more beneficial to some of these species.
Absolutely. I mean, so the big cages that you can partly see behind me, so they are like 6 foot long, 3 foot deep, 4 foot high. And they're all partly designed as various series. So, for instance, the Uselets, which are up here, I'll have to show you some other time. I've done a lot of theory work and a lot of research about cohabiting, you know, the taboo thing. So the problem being is a yes or a no is quite a lazy answer, because, you know, there's so much more to that. So if I was to put, like, say, 2 Uselets in something that's only 2 foot square, then you're going to have issues because you're forcing them onto each other. You have like what is deemed as quite a wide territory. The animals have the opportunity to cross each other's paths. They can get away if they need to, and so forth. And that's the thing. And this was all done through observing what goes on in the wild. Oostelets are 10 to the penny in the wild in Madagascar. You know, and, you know, they're all in close proximity without getting stressed with each other, you know, but you've got to give them the opportunity that should they want to, you know, remove themselves from a situation, that they can do so, you know. And it's no coincidence that outside Peter Fulton, I'm the only person to not just breed Ooselets, but successfully, continuously breed them. You know, for a long time, they were seen as one of the most difficult chameleons to breed. Yet, kind of, as I said, I continue to have success today. And that just goes to show that if you get it right from the beginning, then you can't go wrong, you see. But don't be afraid, you know, I had people at the beginning kind of question, oh, you can't do that, that goes against everything. Who said it goes against everything? Like, the people on Google will tell you the same thing, or experience tells you that, so and I did my due diligence. I spoke to people who kept them and their experiences and what have you. So it's not kind of like I just like the idea of chucking two together, ignorant to it. As I said, the best part of 20 years of, researching these, working with such that, that before I put it in place. And now I've got, as I said, I've got institutions who work with me, who have balls in zoos and various things, who are, working towards with me in trying to establish captive bred populations of these. So, it must be doing something right.
It's giving the animals a chance to have their own territories, but have the socialising side if they want it.
Absolutely. I mean, to be fair, we're not always going to get it right. I understand that, but you won't know that until you try something. But just don't be afraid to hold your hands up and say you got it wrong. As long as you've got humility about things and all that, then you'll be all right. But
I'm going to touch on this quickly, obviously, with all the stuff you've experimented and learnt with and all that. And obviously, last week's podcast, we covered mistakes and issues that people have come across. What's the worst one you've had that you can think of regarding this experimentation of getting the species you've got to where they are?
Is it me making a mistake or just kind of a bad experience?
Either, whichever one you want to go down.
I mean, at the end of the day, I've not got, not afraid to be honest in that, because at the end of the day, I wouldn't have the knowledge that I have without kind of doing things, So I guess if I was going to touch on probably anything, would be going back to, again, the helmet would be, I suppose, a good one to look at in terms of trying to get things right with, obviously, things people have told me as well, how to keep them, but also the temperatures and stuff like that. And there were several. I'm quite happy to hold my hands up and say several times I had to go back to the drawing board because I didn't necessarily have the success, and that included fatalities. I'll be absolutely honest with it. It got me at times questioning whether, because at the end of the day, I didn't want to be contributing to so many wild specimens coming in and dying. Sometimes you just got to hold your hands up and say you're not, they're not necessarily for you. But thankfully, somewhere down the line, something just started working out. Obviously, it wasn't just a case of, oh, keep trying that. It was going out speaking to various people, looking back at the data once again and stuff, trying to figure out what you're doing, not wrong, but what you're doing that isn't working compared to other people, and their successes. And don't get me wrong, I looked at people who were, had very little experience. I looked at people who are highly experienced with a vast knowledge as well. So, no stone was unturned really in researching. And to be honest, I've still got so much more that I want to learn about these animals. It's not a case of like, right, I've got them there, I'm happy with that. I'm still continuously looking at, that's the thing with evolution. Evolution doesn't stand still. Just because this is an animal, does not mean that one day that animal's not going to do something different and completely change its behavior. That's the thing with when an environment is constantly changing like it is, particularly with the challenges that face, wildlife and environments currently. It's going to be constantly evolving. So we have to kind of be on that journey with them as well and be willing to,
I think it's like they say, you don't stop learning until the day you leave this world.
Absolutely not, no.
Fair enough. All right, Mac.
There's serious comedians here. I spoke to Jordan just before we came on the live, and he sent me a boatload of photos And when we'd sorted them all out into folders, there was 22 different species sent over. And some of them are just absolutely... Mrs. wants to work more with chameleons. And just every chameleon that I've showed her, she's like, yes, 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 yes. So we actually spoke to Jordan quite some time ago. And it's there's a species that he's hoping to bring in the new year that we're interested in. And definitely the carpets. But I've just been looking at some... They're incredible.
They really are.
I mean, obviously, long-term gain as well, going on the educational side. Eventually, I'd like to be able to, I mean, I do have people kind of, come to the property because obviously we're based at my house, they are outside. But eventually, I'd like to be able to offer people the opportunity to come and see what we do. And,
Chameleon Zoo.
yeah, I mean, recently I've been speaking to a few other organisations, as we touched on the other day. Obviously, I'm interested in kind of getting involved with many more zoos and things. I mean, I'm very, very fortunate that my name does tend to come up a lot around when a lot of specialist keepers catch up like between themselves. My name thankfully comes up in positive circles, so I'm really thankful for that, and I'm and the opportunity that it affords me. But on the other hand, is I don't sit there and wait for everything to come to me. I have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations just to get in there, and not be afraid. Like if you get knocked back and said, no, we're not interested, to maybe kind of come back. You keep working at what you're doing, and that, and sooner or later people sit up and take notice. So that's what you got to believe in. And as I said, like the educational aspect is extremely important to myself. I do occasionally go out and do educational supports for like local scout groups and stuff like that, which go down well and usually kind of brings a little bit of money in for the scouts and stuff, which is lovely. But again, it's about getting a message across about the importance of not just chameleons, but wildlife in general, and how we take care of it, and that interest, and if we can kind of change. But I mean, like, at the end of the day as well, like I think if more children have interests like us weird lot, that in the streets and things, the problem is like they go on about lack of investment to the children, but they seem to think that investment means more parks. That's not what it is. Investment is in interest in education and stuff. Now, education doesn't just have to be maths, English, and things like that. There's all various areas, and that gone are the days where basically you had interest and you'd be told, oh, you can't make a career of that. You can make a career of anything you want these days. And there's no excuse now. Obviously, having the access to social media like we do now, you don't even have to be a musician. You don't even have to, get an audience with a record label or anything like that. You can promote yourself. It's great, and it's wonderful. Again, you're only limited to your own motivations, really. So, incidentally, I've just been watching. Obviously, you've been posting pictures of all the cristatus. So, these are another one. So last year we produced the first ever cristatus here in the UK. Never been bred before, and it's a wonderful experience. And in fact, the female that I have beside me is one of my F1s, and I hope to come in here early in the year. She's just about ready to start breeding herself, which will be lovely. I'm really excited about producing the next lot. So, but the fact that the babies, you see, like they've got that beautiful little blue, absolutely stunning little creatures, and it would just be nice, as I said, for people to have access to such a more wide variety, you know, and kind of get the enjoyment that I get out of it, really, and, you know, and having the multiple different experiences, you see.
No, I agree with you completely. I mean, the only reason I'm where I am doing all this stuff today is because of my 11-year-old daughter, who's using my YouTube account to comment as we go along at the moment.
Wonderful. It's absolutely, you know, obviously I listened into your first 2 episodes, and, you know, obviously you're saying that, and, you know, that's wonderful to hear, you know, because there's so many parents who, you know, extinguish those dreams and hopes and what have you. You know, and for so many parents who are really struggling to connect with their children, yours is a prime example how, you know, you can go against the traditional time spent with it. You know, there's a multitude of various things, you know, and you're learning as much as she's learning. So it's great. You know, you're both novices and you're coming into it at the same time and you're growing together, you know. And,
So,
you
I
know,
mean, she's 11 and she's already picked the university she wants to because Bangor does a herpetological course over there.
you know, and that's what, and there you go. And like I said, it just goes to show what an impact, you know, it has on our children, you know, just by showing a little bit of interest, you know.
We nurture them. They're our children at the end of the day. We give them the best they can. We're their start at life, and if we can provide better for them, then why not?
But to be honest, like I said, I like from my youngest daughter, now she has her friends around, or there's people ask, oh, can they come around and see her and that, and I'm like, do you know what? I've got all the time in the world. Like, it's a bit like what Chaz says, you know, like building and stuff. And he's fantastic with the youngsters.
Oh, he's brilliant. He is. I really would like to get him on here at some point, but he's a very busy man.
Just seeing how he deals with it, even like the children who aren't necessarily originally, you know, respectful. He has a way of being able to get them to respect the animals and like that. He doesn't give up on them, you know, whereas others, there's shops that would quite happily, like, you know, kick them out or whatever, you know. Chaz understands, you know, what they hold in regards to the future. So, you know, it's got to be invested in stuff. And, you know, I've never met a reptile shopkeeper who has so much patience. And to be honest, that's including like the ignorant ones as well. You know, he's just brilliant. And I've been very fortunate. I've known Chaz an awful lot of years, and there's many times I've had to call upon him for advice on things and stuff. And you know what, he's always been on the end of a phone and stuff. And you know, this is again kind of where the due diligence of doing your time, building those relationships up, and being respectful comes in handy. You know, I've got some wonderful that go back like 20 plus years, whereas others kind of very short lived or what have you. You know, so it just goes to show, you know, if you've got the right attitude and stuff, there are people that will support you. You know,
I mean, I went up to Snakes and Adders a while ago. Obviously, I've touched on what happened with my rhino iguana. That's where that came from. But my daughter came with me to collect it, where she met Pixie while she was working there. Obviously, she's moved on now. But
she's wonderful. She very much was very much in the mould of, and you know, we'll wish her luck when she moved on and stuff. And it's lovely to see her doing great at what she does. And
no, exactly. And she rubbed off really well on my daughter as well, because it's seeing a female in the industry, as much as we have the girls in the groups and all that. When you go into a lot of the shops and stuff, it's a very male-orientated business. So for the young ladies coming into it, it gives them that extra boost.
See, I mean, and I love kind of how, you know, when it comes to actual influences, you know, that there's attitudes towards like women within various industries is so much better because we're afforded more of a more like experience, you know, like whether it's on YouTube channels or shops or whatever, you know, and or like in zoos as well and stuff like that. And just goes to show that, you know, it's not just a man's game or anything like that. You know, that women have women are exactly the same. I was about to say, have just as much to offer, but actually, it's not about a sex thing. It's not about a man or a woman. It just goes to show it doesn't matter who you are. You know, if you're, if you're as enamored by them and dedicated by them, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, anything like that. You know, you all have something to offer. You see.
Yeah, it's the same as with all the walks of life you cross as well within the industry and the hobby. Not everyone comes from the same background. Some people come higher up, some people lower down. I don't mean that derogatory in any way. In the different industries, like myself, who's a mechanic, you've got people who work in offices, you've got lawyers, you've got all sorts. Everyone has the same interests. At the end of the day, everyone has the same goals, but we've all got different approaches to how we do things, which then helps.
We all come into the world the same. We all go out the same. You know, so it's nothing about, you know, intelligence is you can't quantify or measure intelligence by the one thing. Intelligence is more than just knowledge, you know, as in understanding maths or what have you. It comes in a wealth. It's all about learning. You know, we can learn from everybody, you know, including children. You know, in fact, in some respects, children are some of the best teachers out there. You know,
I've learned more about this hobby from my daughter than I have anywhere else because she asks the questions and I need to answer them.
or aren't willing to see. You know, that look at the world with eyes and, you know, with wonderment. You know, they don't close their mind off to things. You know, we can learn an awful lot. And, you know, while that's happening, and that kind of fills me with a sense of happiness that maybe like the world has a future. You know.
I don't agree completely there. The innocence of children will change everything.
Really.
What are you smirking at, Mac?
Oh, I've just had a text to say, are we having a part 2? Honestly, it's when I look at the notes, like we've touched on a lot of stuff, but I think we're only like halfway through the actual show notes. So we are definitely going to have to invite you back for a part 2 if you can.
You know, and admittedly, I was a bit kind of, I didn't know how it would go, you know, whether the interest would be there. So I really, whoever that person was, I really appreciate the feedback. I haven't really done a great deal of videos and stuff, you know, and I touched on this with yourselves that, you know, I've got a lot of practice to do. As long as I get my down, I'd be very happy.
Yeah. We would. There's so because we've all got the same. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We want the right information from the right person about the right subject. And Andy and I both said this on our first episode. We don't know. You know, we've been here. We're a drop in the ocean compared to people like yourself who's been in here for 30 years. And there's many other keepers that hit that same quota as you do, and there's no point in us trying to sit here and read off the internet and have sort of a half-hearted conversation about it. We need to get the right people in, and that's hopefully what we're going to do. And there's no one better for chameleons that I've come across so far than yourself.
I mean, what I want to put out there as well is for every person thinks or has there's always somebody who knows more or can offer more than yourself. And I've always kind of lived by those goals that, you know, just because I have a fountain of knowledge of something, I'm not the product, I never will be. It's just a continuation all the time, like we keep going on about evolving. You know, I never want to stop still. You know, I really, as we touched on, obviously last year I was diagnosed with autism, and I've always had a very analytical brain. I've always wanted to know about more things. I've always questioned things and stuff, and actually, like, I'm really proud that I am the person I am because it's what drives me forward. You know, I always want to know why this connects with this and such. You know, we will never have it all, and that's the beauty about it. You know, we could live 1,000 years and we would still not have the answers to everything. You know, and while we have that, you know, the world's an exciting place.
I mean,
Certainly.
we're still discovering new species daily, let's be honest, so we're never going to get to the end of it.
I mean, we can look at this where there have been certain species where, like for instance, if you look at Ophiophagus hanna, the king cobras, there's a lot of debate about kind of, are they subspecies or are they complete species of their own? And there are certain ones where they've been completely given a new scientific name, but actually they're not. You know, it's a very difficult one because like there are certain factions out there that are taking it upon themselves to identify something that has actually already been identified. The area, only a world out there really, and like I said, that's where it's interesting, and not being able to or not being afraid to challenge something doesn't seem right, you know. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to go out there and make a difference ourselves and what have you, you know, see what comes. But like I said, my next aspirations are to particularly I'd like to get out to like the, you know, the forest of Uganda, you know, particularly like where they do the gorilla trails, but I'm looking more, you know, to experience a lot of the chameleon species. I did forget to touch on something which I did want to talk about, was one of the exciting species that I'm working with that have never been seen in the UK before, which is the Archaeus tigris, the Seychelles tiger chameleon. Very interesting little creature. Have you got any of the pictures there that I sent you?
Who was it? Sorry.
Archaeus tigris, the tiger. So the funny thing is that, like, the males, when they're extremely vibrant, they go like this neon yellow and they go all black spots with a white chin. Goes completely against what a tiger is, but absolutely fascinating.
I think you wouldn't know. Oh yes.
But they're basically, they're not a very big one, but they're very interesting. Like for instance, how their nesting is different, how they live, and we're still learning an awful lot. But we are on limited time with them. As anybody knows, the Seychelles chameleons are, the Seychelles as an island is drastically shrinking. They're losing a lot of land to the sea, which is really important that these ones get established in the wild. So then here we go, looking there. So in the wild, notoriously, they're well known for laying their eggs in the leaf folds of pineapple plants. As you can see, it's worked for me. So generally, they don't lay your typical nests. It's quite interesting because obviously with the rains and that, those little ponds do fill up with water, but it doesn't have an impact on the nest. So if they get wet, it's not necessarily a problem. There's been theories, and I'm yet to kind of definitely confirm if this is true, but there have been witnesses that at night time these little chameleons have been known to sleep underwater.
Wow.
So they literally sleep on low ground or roots and stuff like that. The water's come up and they're protected. So there's been various reports of this, which if it was maybe one person, I'd probably like question it. But because there's been several, that's quite interesting. So it's something I'm hoping to be able to get more information about. And like I said, ideally, if I can get out to Madagascar, I'd like to do a day trip out to Seychelles, because obviously it's an island just off Madagascar, and see kind of what I can find out there, more information. But as you can see, this is like a kind of layout for them. They like to sit on like the large leaves and stuff. And they quite like it quite moist as well. They, being where they come from, obviously, they're quite used to it being quite a moist environment, and that's where they're at their happiest. So these do generally get quite a heavy wet season. But
They're an incredible
unfortunately,
looking.
I think
yeah,
we've got at least 2 more podcasts to come out of this. I don't think we're going to cover this in 2 parts.
I'm currently writing. I'm writing an article for Tony Wrigley of Responsible Reptile Keepers magazine at the moment on them. The only issue I had, so you saw the eggs. I had at the start of the year, I had a major malfunction on my incubator. Lost loads of eggs, absolutely gutted. So including like quite a few of the brachisias as well. So I'm back to kind of square one with that. But this isn't the end thing. But at least I know I'm kind of getting there in terms of they're doing what they need to be doing. So I'm really happy with that. And these are other ones as well. They do quite well in groups. They'll quite happily live in groups. You give them quite a large area really well. You know, even you can even have 2 males in the group and all that, and they don't fight like a traditional pair of chameleons. I mean, they'll colour up and stuff like that, but they don't traditionally fight type things. You know what I mean? Which is quite interesting. But again, it could be down to the fact that they were just I kept them in quite large territory, so they didn't really have anything apart from when they cross each other's path, really. So. But yeah, watch out for that. So hopefully, well, in the next couple of years, I'll finally crack it again. So
I will look forward to hearing about that. All right, we've been at this 2 hours now.
really,
Yeah.
2 hours.
Wow. There's me thinking we've only been at it for an hour, but
No, we're on 2 hours.
You know what? I've got a book of notes that I've been taking. That's why I've been looking down, just writing things that I want to remember and stuff. And I do it all the while. It's the whole book's just stuff that I write down that I want to remember. So it's not that.
At
I've
least
not
it's
been
recorded, so you can go back through it.
Yeah, 100%.
But no, I think we have to do a second part if Jordan's happy for that.
100%.
yeah, you know, well, I know we were touching on it about the various things. I love the idea. I'm just going to put it out there. I love the idea that you're looking to get people in their specialist fields in, which is something I don't think a lot of, even in the States, that they tend to do a lot of. So they tend to concentrate in like one area. But the beauty about it's not even what you're talking about. It's not just the animals. Maybe getting someone like Thomas in, like who's a lighting specialist, or
I'm working on Thomas. It's just getting him in his diary to coincide is a pain in the ass.
Things we can learn, because all these things lend themselves to helping people to take things to the next level. In terms of what they want to achieve. And obviously when we go to see a lot of these zoo exhibits, really kind of is able to inspire us. So it's great to be able to do that. But touching on that as well, I do have. I do play a part with certain ones in terms of advising in regards to new enclosure builds and stuff like that, which is really exciting for me. That I have an involvement, and I hope that continues. Not just that I'm able to contribute to that, but I can actually also learn a bit more on that particular environment as well. Access to things that I could probably only dream of. So it kind of goes both ways, really. It helps me. I always take something positive from any experience I have with anyone. So,
No, brilliant. Right. Well, I think we're going to have to call it a night for tonight.
It's been a long day today for me. So, hopefully we'll have a few more babies ready to come out tomorrow. I did check before we started, and there's another couple have picked out the eggs. So. Yeah,
well, good luck with that. Good luck to that, because that's going well.
But to be honest, it happened. It couldn't have happened at a time, really. So, and it was
no, definitely not.
Give you the exclusive news on that. So
yeah, it made me smile when I got the text message.
We will definitely milk that.
Absolutely. So. Hey guys,
yeah.
I really appreciate you inviting me onto the show and me to discuss what we're doing, and I hope kind of, it's kind of maybe give me a bit of a wider audience where people maybe want to kind of learn a bit more about what we do and also kind of where they can get involved as well. So obviously, just speak to anybody there. Anybody who wants further information, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram under JSL Chameleons Exotic.
Yeah, I've linked your socials in the video description as well, so people make sure you drop Jordan a follow on Instagram, Facebook, and if you're looking for a specialty chameleon or wanting to improve standards that you're currently running, by all means reach out.
And also, just quickly to my daughter, plug your phone in.
I will be doing, as I said, like watch your space. We'll be opening an educational YouTube channel at some stage as well, a website. So also there, kind of, I hope to be able to also, as part of it, maybe create an online shop where I can maybe offer items and materials to be able to create your own ones. As I said, I do custom design consultations and builds as well. If anybody needs any support or anything like that, I'm always on to offer that as well. So, like I said, to get hold of me.
I was getting to that.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
If you hold on a sec, Jordan, we'll say goodbye to all the viewers, and then we'll say goodbye to you properly, folks. You know what? We spoke about this, and we weren't gotten sure whether we were going to ask, but only half of you are subscribed. Just hit the subscribe button. That's all you have to do. I'm not very good at this self promo stuff, but just smash that subscribe button. And on that
we're
note,
trying, we're learning, we're getting there.
On that note, when I find the right tab to close down, see you on the next one.
Yeah. See you next week.
I think that's us ended.
I'll let you know in a minute when it goes.